forced, the only porters that they could, that were available for them to hire, Sherpas, I guess we could call them Sherpas, but they're porters, were a team of men who the year before had mutinied against, they'd been hired by, I believe it was a German party of climbers, and about halfway up, when the going got tough, these guys murdered and left to die their German, the German party. Okay, these guys were. Would you want to hire these guys to, to climb, with you?
No.
But they were the only people available, and people plan and save money and prepare for sometimes years for these climbs. And if the weather's bad, they go and do it. And if the only Sherpas you can hire are the people that killed their bosses last year, you got to hire them. So they hired this roughneck crew of porters, and Crowley figured that he could keep them in line. And they run into difficulty, weather difficulty, and everybody is grumbling, and they want to go back home. They're all thinking it's too dangerous to go forward. And as sort of a diversionary tactic, Crowley takes two of them and scouts out ahead for the next day's climb. And there's this classic image of these ice bridges, that span this hideous chasms and abysses,
right. Yes.
And as it turned out, the two men that he took did not follow his instructions and concerning one of these ice bridges, and they fell to their death. Now Crowley was in a predicament where he would have to go back to camp with all these other guys that were already experienced in killing their bosses, and go back and tell them that it was so dangerous up ahead that two of them already were killed. It was an almost impossible situation. Crowley had to go back and tell these guys information that would make them mutiny and kill. Okay, it was horrible. And Crowley, in his perverse wit, went back and didn't mention the fact that the other two were missing. And when the rest of the Sherpas questioned him about where these other two were, Crowley said, "I killed them and ate them." And it was such a weird thing to say. And I think he probably pulled a revolver on them, as he said that. But they were so freaked, and in their superstitious mind, they looked on Crowley as some kind of a wild demon, and the party returned home safely. Okay, and they didn't mutiny. Word got out that Crowley had confessed to killing and eating two Sherpas.
Right.
When he gets back to India, and they're interviewed by members of the Alpine Club, which were very kind of jealous of Crowley's independent party's climb. Reporters ask him, "Is it true, Mr. Crowley, that you killed and ate two of your Sherpas?" Now, in Crowley's mind, no one in the world would believe that he killed and ate two Sherpas. So just for fun, just facetiously, he said, "Oh, of course I did."
Right.
And I guess everybody there giggled, or most of the people giggled and knew what was going on. But by the time that reached the newspapers.
Mm-hmm.
Aleister Crowley killed and ate 2 Sherpas. And he enjoyed that absurdity so much that he continued to, when people ask him, he continued to laugh at them and say, "Oh, of course. What would you have done?" kind of thing.
Mm.
Okay, so that's just kind of one example of how Crowley is underestimating the public at large with his wit. Of course, he didn't kill those guys and ate them, and he felt bad about it. And he writes about the incident in his Confessions.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And another more exotic rumor was that he wrote in black and white in Magic and Theory and Practice in a chapter called The Bloody Sacrifice. He talks about this sacrifice of a male child.
Right.
And he's in a footnote. He said that his records show that he'd done that 120 times last year, or 1 year he did that. And of course, he's got other footnotes that says, that when an adept says one thing, he's probably saying another. And in another footnote in that same chapter, he all but says in so many words, "Please don't take what I'm saying literally here."
Right. Hmm.
Okay, so what he's talking about in this Bloody Sacrifice chapter is he's talking about sex magic. And in 1923 or 4, when this chapter was written, it was not only not proper, it was not legal to talk about certain explicit sex acts. Even people in medical journals had to be careful about how they breached that topic.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so what Crowley was saying, and he thought it was clear to absolutely everybody that knew where he was going with this line of discussion. What he was saying was that in that given year, his records show that he ejaculated 120 times without making a woman pregnant.
Okay. See what you mean. Yes.
And so he was doing it in such a way as to offer very advanced sexual magical techniques in theory, but doing it in a way that people intelligent enough to be interested in that subject in the first place would know exactly what he was saying. And not only that, in such a way as he'd get a smile out of them, But I tell you, when he wrote that, not everybody was laughing. And today, they still quote that as proof that he confessed to doing that.
Yes.
The truth is, Crowley never did anything, was never arrested for any crime. Other than those involved in bankruptcy.
Well, that's quite a way to veil that type of terminology. It's to bring it up another notch, so to speak, to be
yes.
It's. But do you think that Crowley, like in one sense, ultimately didn't care about what anyone else thought about this or what he was doing? I mean, he was doing his own thing in that regard, and it didn't really care about how other people would interpret this. Do you think that was the case as well? I
think Crowley in his first 50 years didn't care what people thought. As a matter of fact, let them think what they want.
Right.
But I think as he matured and in the last 20 years of his life, when he realized that his work had really been damaged by this cavalier attitude, and that people weren't reading his books. He wasn't having, the ability to attract disciples. And so I think especially in the last 10 or 15 years, he truly regretted all of those, I guess, indiscretions of attitude. And I think he would have just loved to have been accepted in the world of spiritual exploration, in the same way as like Aldous Huxley or
right.
Because he was of that caliber, and so it was sad. It was sad in a way, and we still enjoy the outrageousness of his behavior in the early years. But as it turned out for Crowley personally, it was a bit tragic.
I want to go back a little bit to Crowley's tarot deck as well, and ask if you've been able to kind of, I guess in one way, figure out why you were so drawn in by this deck, or what it was about the particular composition of these cards that kind of triggered, if you will, this feeling in you when you looked at them.
Oh yeah, it's a fascinating subject. I took 3 years and wrote. I guess it's back in 2005 when I finished. I wrote a book called Understanding Aleister Crowley's Thoth Tarot, and it's a pretty thick book, and it I don't know if I or anyone else in the planet. That was back in 2003. It was finished. I certainly I was more or less recruited by members of or people at New Leaf Distributing and Wiser Books to write an extended commentary explanation that might be suitable for people to try to figure out what Crowley was saying in the Book of Thoth and with his Thoth Tarot. And so, but I went ahead and with the project, and it took me 3 years. So it's called Understanding Aleister Crowley's Thoth Tarot, and it's been translated into German. I think that's the only language it's been translated in so far. And where I try to explain this, Frieda Harris Crowley met Frieda Harris very late in life. He was in his late 60s and she was in her early 60s. And she was an avant-garde artist. And she was a disciples of Rudolf Steiner.
Right.
And she was also a theosophist and a co-mason. So she was interested in everything Aleister Crowley was interested in. The Golden Dawn had long before dissolved. So she was, and she met Crowley in the 36, I believe, 36, 38. And they met at a party with other eccentric people. And Harris, of course, knew Crowley by reputation, and Harris was smart enough to not be afraid of him. And Harris more or less approached Crowley and said, in so many words, "Look, you're approaching your 70s here, and your health is not all that good. You're going to die pretty soon. I think you should write a book that synthesizes all of your accumulated knowledge and experience in the magical arts. And I think you ought to organize that book along the lines of the tarot, Kabbalistically." And Crowley said, "No, that's